Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot Daf Nun Aleph. Today's daf is, this week's learning is dedicated to the safety of our nation, the soldiers and citizens of Israel, and for the liberation of the Iranian people. May we soon see the realization of Le'Yehudim, Hayta, Ora, Simcha, V'Sason, V'Ikar. Happy Purim to everyone. Bit of a strange Purim, many different ways, but wishing everyone a good Purim, and may we hear B'Sarot Tovot B'Karav very soon. Okay, we're going to get started. What we started yesterday, we're going to finish very quickly, but it's going to open, you can almost say, open a Pandora's box, because what we're going to do is, we were in the middle, let's just review. We brought a Mishnah. It's actually a Mishnah. I was just rushing at the end of Daf to see where it was from, but it's from later on in Masechet Menachot. And it talks about the Chavitei Kohen Gadol. It said two things. Number one, it's really talking about the preparing the dough. So preparing the dough, meaning the kneading until the baking, all that is done, number one, in the Asara, and number two, it can even be done on Shabbat. And that was the issue that was interesting them, specifically that it's done on Shabbat. So now they said, how do we know it's Doche Shabbat? So for that, we saw three reasons. Today we're going to see a fourth. We're going to bring a Braita. I'll just tell you the structure from here until the next Mishnah, which is in Amud Bet. We're basically going to bring a Braita to support answer number 4. But the first line of that Braita supports answer number 4, and then the Braita goes into something else entirely relating to the Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. And we're going to have a long Braita, and then 3 different ways of reading that Braita. That's basically what's going to take us all the way into the top of the next Amud. Okay? Then we're going to have a new Mishnah, and we'll go on about other things about the Mincha Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. So, again, let's review the 3 answers that we saw until now. We saw Tofeni, right? Tofenu na'eh, which basically means if we cooked it yesterday, it wouldn't be good anymore. That's why we didn't bake it yesterday. That's why we don't bake it the day before. It would swell. And then they said, well, you could put greens around it, and that would kind of keep it better. Okay, so that we had a possible solution to, and that doesn't necessarily prove you have to bake it on Shabbos. Debei Rabbi Yishmael said, te'aseh, it should be done, meaning no matter what, even on Shabbat. Abaye said, solet mincha tamid, which means, there's a mention of the word tamid in the pasuk. Maybe it's like the minchat midin. What's the minchat midin? It's the mincha offering, the libations that go together with the minchat tamid. We're actually going to talk a lot about this today. And not in this context, but since the tamid was done on Shabbat, this is also done on Shabbat. And Rava says, al machvat, milamed shetu'una kli. Okay, now we're up to the 4th one, which we didn't see yesterday, at the top of our daf. He says you're supposed to make this on a machvat. Okay, soon I'm going to read you all the psukim about the mincha chavitim. There's not a lot of them, and we're going to darshan them a lot today, the whole class. So I want to read them all inside, but you'll see them inside in a minute. Also the tamid part, also the al machvat. But Rava says basically it needs a kli. What does that have to do with Shabbat? Meaning it has to be in a machvat. A machvat is a pan, like a frying pan, like a deep pan. But the point being that a kli in the temple, it's not like they just have random frying pans. They're sacred vessels. Since it needs to be made in a sacred vessel, well, what's the problem? If we cook it the day before, or bake it, fry it in the frying pan the day before, what happens? It becomes sanctified. Now, what's the laws with sanctified items? It's going to be disqualified overnight. Anything that becomes sanctified in the temple has to be dealt with that day. You can't leave it overnight. It disqualifies it. So we can't do it from yesterday because it would be disqualified. That once you say it needs a kli, then by default you have to do it that day. And then you're going to have to do it on Shabbat, because if it's brought 7 days a week, it's obviously brought on Shabbat. And if it's burnt on the altar on Shabbat and it's sanctified when it's in the frying pan, then obviously you're going to have to do all that in the same day. Okay, that's Rava. So now we're going to bring Tanya Kavatei to Rava. We're going to bring a Braita to support Rava, and the Braita starts off, Al Machvat Melamed Shetu'una Kli. Okay, so Al Machvat comes to say it needs a Kli. Now, if we had stopped the Braita here, it would have a much simpler daf. Okay, but we didn't stop the Braita here, and we're now going to have a lot of other things to say. So it's really one main topic, which the next issue in this Braita is, number 1, it teaches you it needs a vessel. Number 2, we're going to talk about how much oil does it need, and how do we get that from the psukim. So I'm going to read you the whole section now, because I think it's important before we go into the Gemara. Both the first section of our Braita and the second section in the next Mishnah. We're going to particularly really the next section. Okay, but if already we're here, we'll do it we'll do it now, which is let's read these psukim about the Mincha Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. So if you have a way to open it, look in Vayikra chapter 6, verse 12. Okay, V'daber Hashem al Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moshe saying, Zeh korban Aharon ubanav. This is the korban of Aaron and his sons. Already a little bit strange because it's not really Aharon's sons, it's really Aaron's, okay, and his son who will become the Kohen Gadol, not all of his sons. So that's a little strange because the topic of this section is the Mincha Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol, right, not of his sons. Asher yakrivu laHashem. Okay, later the Gemara is going to say those words are really not necessary. Yakrivu laHashem, who else is they sacrificing it to if not God? We don't have sacrifices to other gods. Okay, biyom himashachoto, on the day that he is inaugurated into his job. Now this is also strange because I already told you the topic is the Mincha Kohen Chavitin. This the Kohen Gadol does every day, not on the day he's inaugurated, also the day he becomes Kohen Gadol, but it's also every day. Already, I've raised a billion questions from just the first few words of this pasuk. Asirit haifa, okay, you bring a tenth of an ephah, that's an isaron as we call it, solet, mincha, okay, so it's a mincha offering that's made from solet, okay, until then we didn't even know it was a mincha. Tamid, now, solet mincha tamid. Obviously this word tamid is a little strange because they're telling you what you're supposed to bring, and then they say always. First of all, we just said biyomi mashechoto, on the day he's inaugurated, not always. Now we say always, which makes it sound like it's every day. Already this word tamid, if you remember, Abai darshan that word and said, oh, this is comparing it to the Mincha Tamid, just like the Mincha Tamid is brought on Shabbat, this is also brought on Shabbat. We're going to see other drashot of this word later. Machatzita b'boker, machatzita b'erev. We spent a lot of time darshaning that yesterday, which is half is brought in the morning, half of it is brought in the evening. We said, right, have to bring the whole thing, and half of it, meaning of the whole, is brought then. Then the next pasuk says, Al machvat bashemen. Okay, these are the words we're going to darshan now. So Al machvat, it's in a pan. That teaches you it needs a kli sharet. That was the first halacha. Bashemen, with oil, te'aseh, will be done. Morbechet tiviena tufini mincha pitim takriv reach nichach laHashem. That describes the method you're supposed to do it. Tufini, we already darshaned a bunch of times. I'm not going to. Our daf today doesn't deal much with this pasuk, so I'm not going to focus on it. And then, after we finish, okay, so we said how much oil. Well, we didn't really say how much oil. It just said it needs a tenth of an ephah. It needs oil. Okay, it should be baked in this way, which again wasn't so clear. We had different drashot. Fry, bake, bake, fry, bake, fry, bake. Then there's another strange pasuk. HaKohen HaMashiach tachtam bibanav yaseh ota. Okay, this sounds kind of simply to be saying, well, when Aaron dies, so his son, who becomes the Kohen Gadol instead of him, will do it. Chok olam, but we're going to see that that's not necessarily what this pasuk means. Chok olam, it should be forever. LaHashem, for God. Kalil toktar, the entire thing is burned on the altar. V'chol minchat kohen kalil tiyeh lo te'achel. Now, the section ends with something completely different, which is when a kohen offers a mincha, we've learned this before, when a kohen decides to bring a voluntary offering, not like this, which was an obligatory offering, any kohen who decides, I'm bringing a voluntary mincha offering to the temple, right? Normally, if someone brings a voluntary offering, the kometz is burned, remember, and the rest is eaten by the kohanim. If a kohen brings one, the whole thing is burned. At least it's what we think it says. It just says kalil tiyeh. It will be complete. It actually doesn't say it's completely burned. We're going to learn later it means it's completely burned. Lo te'achel, it can't be eaten. Which means, we're going to see this at the very end of today's daf, hopefully you'll remember, lo te'achel means there's a negative prohibition. If someone eats it, they get lashes. Okay? Notice it didn't say that with the Kohen Gadol's Mincha Chavitin, even though it also is completely burned. Well, these are all just kind of to whet your appetite for what's going to come today. And I'm stalling a little bit before we get to this complicated braita. Okay, so now the braita starts off. Bashemen, lahosif lashemen. So the first drasha was al machvat. Now the next word is bashemen. Now why does it say bashemen? Theoretically, once we said it's machvat, well, then you go to where we talked about a minchat machvat. If you remember, there's different kinds of minchas you bring. A machvat is like a bit of a deep pan where you put lots of oil in. So a machvat is always prepared with oil, not because it's a frying pan and they use oil. We're talking about the mincha has oil, and in fact, it has oil in it when you fry it. So, anyway, there's oil in the mincha. That's just, it's not for frying. There's oil in the mixture. Remember, most minchas have oil in them, right? Just some don't. The mincha kote, for example, doesn't have oil. right? There was the chareva and the blula. Most minchas have oil. But the point being that once it says the word machvat, you don't need beshemen. Because machvat just in your head says, oh, it's like a minchat machvat. Minchat machvat has oil. So this has oil. So why does the Torah add the word oil? So according to the Braita, it's lahosif la shemen. It's to say this has more shemen than usual. What's the typical amount? The typical amount of oil is for every isaron, a tenth of an ephah, which is about 2 kilo, you bring a log of shemen. Okay? Now, that's the typical amount. But it says here, this must be saying b'shemen to add more than the typical amount, more than 1 log. Ve'eni yodea kama, but I don't know how much. So hareini dan. So comes the author of this Braita and says, but I can give a logical explanation. Ne'emar kan shemen, v'ne'emar lahalam b'minchat nesachim shemen. Well, shemen appears here, and shemen appears somewhere else. Where? Okay, now you go to Bamidbar, chapter 15. Okay, this is a good way to remember. It's in chapter 15 of Bamidbar. After the miraglim, the sin of the spies, it then starts off with a section right after. It says, speak to the Jewish people and tell them when you get to the land, right after actually the Mapilim, okay, but right where they try to then go in the land and then they get killed. So at that point, there was a little bit of a fear that they weren't going to get into the land. And the next section starts with, Ki tavo el eretz moshvatechem. When you get to the land, it was like God's way of saying you will get to the land. Okay? That's the way you remember this comes right after. But what are they talking about? Remember this whole thing? About the libations. Remember it said, why does it say when you get to the land, did they bring this libations in the desert? Did they not? We had all the different opinions. And then if we did, then why does it say when you get to the land, you're going to bring libations? But that's a side point for right now. It says when you get to the land and you bring korbanot, this is what you should bring. And it details how much flour, how much solet, and how much oil. And I'll just tell you them so you remember, right? We've talked about this before. The sheep, the one you do, if you bring a sheep, then you bring 3 log for an isaron. There's an isaron of solet, and you bring 3 log of shemen, of oil. If it's an ayil, a ram, you bring more isronim, okay? You bring 2 esronim, but you bring 4 logs, so it's more oil, okay? It's 4, but it's double and not triple, right? Notice the ratio. The ratio in the kfasim is 3-1. The ratio in the ayil, the ram, it's 4-2, which is like 2 for every saron, 2 log of oil. And likewise for the parim. The parim you bring 3, okay, everyone goes up in amount. You bring 3 esronim, 6 log shemen. Okay, I'm going to tell you in the pasuk how you know this. It all goes by a hin. A hin is 12 log. And by the parim it says half a hin, so that's 6. By the elim, it says a third, which is 4. And by the kfasim, it says a quarter of a hin, which is 3. Okay? The main point being, remember this in your head, 3-1 ratio for the sheep, 2-1 ratio for the ayil and the par. That's going to come up later. Okay? It's 4-2, 4 log to 2 isronim, or 6-3, which is a 2-1 ratio. So now the Gemara says like this. Maybe we learn it from the nisachim. From which nisachim? Well, the reasonable one would be the sheep one, which is 3-1. So he says we'll learn it from the sheep. Shemen, ma lahalan, and it says in Menachot nisachim, it also says shemen. Ma lahalan shloshet lugin lisaron, afkan shloshet lugin lisaron. So maybe we'll learn it from there. It's 3-1. So let's just remember how we started, because this is going to be very important to understand all the different parts of this Braita. We start with saying b'shemen means add more oil, because you don't need bishemen. It's obvious you need oil because it's in a machvad, and the machvad already we know from other psukim. Right, this is a minchat nedav if you bring a voluntary offering in a machvat, which is not what this is. But machvat means it has oil. So shemen must be to add shemen. Then we say, well, how much? Well, let's learn it from the libations. There you have, when you in the one where there's an isaron, there's 3 log of shemen. Oh, kalech l'derech zo. Or maybe not. Okay, there's going to be a lot of this today. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll say, Ne'amar kan shemen. Maybe we don't learn from the libations. Maybe we'll learn from Ne'amar b'minchat nedav shemen. There's other menachot also where it says shemen. And there it's not 3-1. It's 1-1. Okay? Ma lahalan log echad. Av kan log echad. In a regular minchat nedava, it's 1-1. Okay? So now, before we go on, I'm going to point out a question that the Gemara points out, because I didn't think this was a difficulty when I read it the first time, but I think it's important that you see already where the Gemara is going. which is, and now we're in a Braita, but later the Gemara is going to come and ask about this. Didn't we start off by saying bishemen means there's extra oil here? So how could we think when it started, stage one was to say bishemen means extra shemen. Then they said, well, we don't know how much extra. So then it said, oh, let's learn it from the libations. And the libations that go with the sacrifices have 3 log of shemen for 1 isaron. And they said, or maybe we'll learn how much from a regular one, which is 1 log. But that's not extra. So this seems to contradict the first line. The first line established it as there's more oil than normal. And now it's suggesting maybe it's got the regular amount. Something doesn't seem to jive here with what we started with. So that's going to be the Gemara's problem. That's going to lead us to 3 different ways of reading this Braita. Okay, but we can leave that aside right now. And let's go back. So right now they're suggesting either learn it from libations, 3 log of oil for the isaron, or learn it from the voluntary regular mincha offering, which is 1 log to 1 isaron. Near Elami Domeh. So let's now bring it. That's the first. They started with the Strasha and the pasuk bishemen. Then they said, well, let's learn shemen from shemen. Okay, it says shemen here, it says shemen there, but then we said, but it says shemen somewhere else too. It could be 3, it could be 1. We don't know which one. So how are we going to figure it out? Let's employ logic. Danim tavshat mi tavshat. Okay, what is tavshat mi tavshat? Tavshat is not a Hebrew word. It's a rashi tevot. It's abbreviations for 4 ways in which we're going to say it's similar to the libations that go with the obligatory sacrifices. Tadir. Okay, first of all, we're talking about the sheep. What's the sheep libations? They go with the korban tamid that's brought every day. So already we have a big similarity. We're talking about the Menachot kohen chavitim, which is brought every day, tadir, every day, and twice a day. And the korban tamid, which has these libations that are 3 log per isaron, is also brought every day. Number 2, ba'chova. It's also obligatory. Number 3, docha Shabbat. They both override Shabbat. Number 4, docha Tumah. It overrides Tumah. If there's impurity in the temple, it's korban sibor, we can bring it. So those are all ways in which the Menachot Chavitim, the Kohen Gadol, is similar to the korban tamid and the libations that go with it. And none of these are true for a Menachot Nedavah. Menachot Nedavah is a voluntary offering. So it's not every day, it's not obligatory, it doesn't override Shabbat, and it doesn't override Tumah, because it's an individual korban. So we're not going to learn this korban Menachot Chavitim from this other korban that doesn't have any similarities to it. But we're back to or maybe you could say the opposite. Danim yagel mi yagel. Okay, mine says yagil mi yagil, but the yud in the middle seems to be not in most Girsa. We're going to get rid of it. Or yagel mi yagel. What's yagel? Yagel. Yachid. Well, the Menachot kohen chavitin is an individual brings it, a kohen gadol. And the Menachot Nedavah, an individual brings. Biglal atzma, it comes on its own. It doesn't come because of a different korban. It's a standalone. It's not a secondary to, right? When you bring a korban, you have to bring the nisachin, right? That's the libation one, where it's 3 log. But this is more similar to the other one. Livona, and they're both brought with frankincense, and the libations that go with the korbanot are not. So, so for that same logic, you could learn tavshat from tavshat, but you could learn yagel from yagel, and logic doesn't get us anywhere here. So we tried logic, we still don't know how much oil. So now we're going to have Rabbi Yishmael ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and Rabbi Shimon, and they're each going to give a different answer. Rabbi Yishmael ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Omiel, so that mincha tamid. We're going to go back to that pasuk that Abai used to darshan. It's like the tamid that it's doche Shabbat. He's going to say it's like the tamid that libations we're going to learn it from. Harehi lacha kiminchat kmidin. Why does it say so la mincha tamid? It's like the mincha of the korban tamid, which we said is 3 log to an isaron, and that's how he gets it. Ma minchat midin shlosha lugin lisaron, avzo shlosha lugin lisaron. So just like the mincha that goes along with the korban tamid is 3 to 1, this is also 3 to 1. So 3 log, and that's your answer. Rabbi Shimon Omer, I want to just point out, according to him, just so you notice, there's no drasha of beshemen, that shemen is extra. We could go with a completely different drasha. It's mincha tamid. The mincha tamid means it's like the mincha v'tamid. That's what it's coming for. It's a drasha from a different pasuk entirely. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he sticks with ribakan shemen. There's this extra word shemen, which means there's a lot of oil. So we need an atypical amount of oil. So where are we going to learn it from? Well, Ribabim and Kvasim Shemen, also by the libations of, okay, we're going to see that he gets to the same answer, but he gets to it in a different way. Because it says Bishemen, which is an extra word, you didn't need it. We knew it was Shemen, because it said Machvat. So we look somewhere else where there's extra Shemen. Where is that? By the libations of the Korban Tamid, the sheep one. Malalan Shloshet Lugin Lisaron, Avkan Shloshet Lugin Lisaron. Okay, that's Rabbi Shimon. But then there's another question on this, either Rabbi Shimon himself or someone else. O Kalech L'derech Zo, wait a minute. If you're saying Ribakan Shemen, we're going to learn it from another place where there's more than usual amount of Shemen. Well, why are you learning it from the sheep? You could learn it from the Purim and the Elim, which remember, I told you already, it's 2 log per isaron, not 3 log per isaron. So now they say, Ribakan Shemen, Riba Mimcha Parim ve'Elim Shemen. Also the ones with the bulls and the rams also has oil, extra than usual, more than usual. Malalan Shnei Lugin Lisaron, there the ratio is 2 to 1, even though, right, they do bring more, they bring 4 log or 6 log, but it's 2 to 1 ratio per isaron. Avkan Shnei Lugin Lisaron. So maybe here it should be only 2 log and not 3. Well, near Elami Domeh, we're back to, okay, well, which is it more similar to? And this is where we're going to end the Braita. If we're going to try to compare this extra oil that we have in this offering of the Mincha Kol Chavitin, we're going to compare it to something, what would be more likely to compare it to? The libation for the sheep or the libation for the bulls and the rams? Well, we're going to say like this. Dani Mincha Haba Yisaron, Mincha Haba Yisaron. We'd rather take it from another mincha that has the exact same amount of flour in it. The amount of flour in the kvasim is 1 isaron. In the other, it's 2, it's 3. That's not the same amount of flour. So, if we're going to learn it, we have a choice. Is it more similar to 1 isaron, or is it more similar to the case where there's 2 or 3 isaronim? Well, obviously learn it from the one that's 1. They both, in the end, conclude the same thing, but they get there in a different manner. Okay, so again, Rabbi Yishmael, just to summarize, gets it there from Sol Mincha Tamid, and Rabbi Shimon gets it from Riba Shemen, and then if Riba Shemen, well, to which is it most similar? To the sheep, because the sheep also has 1 isaron of solet. And they both get to the same answer, 3 log of oil, but in a very different way. So now here comes the Gemara's question, which I already told you. Hagufa Kashi. This Braita has a difficulty inside of it. Why? Amart b'shemen lehosif lashemen. In the beginning, you started out with this assumption. Bishemen means there's more than the usual amount of shemen. And then the Gemara, and then the Braita went to ask how much. And then when it said how much, it suggested maybe more, maybe the same amount, maybe the usual, right? Which doesn't make any sense. It's as if they were rejecting the previous drasha, which it wasn't really, didn't seem to be doing that. So if you're comparing it to the Mincha Nedav Shemen, which has the regular amount of oil, that seems to be rejecting the original. So to resolve this problem, that line O Kalech L'derech Zo, where it says, the first time where it says, or maybe not, maybe we'll learn it from there, seems to contradict the first line. We're going to have to come up with creative ways to read this Braita. So the first is Abai. Amar Abai. Mantana Bish. Now, I'm going to remind you. Rabbi Yishmael comes up in the middle of the Braita, and Rabbi Shimon comes up after him. But before that, we don't have anyone in any name appearing, right? It's not clear who's speaking in the beginning. So this is going to be the whole question. We're going to have 3 possibilities. One is that we're going to have a back and forth between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yishmael even earlier on. And the one who said that is Rabbi Shimon in the beginning. And the one who said the other option, the other suggestion, is Rabbi Yishmael, even though they didn't appear by name earlier. Then we're going to say maybe the second option is going to be the whole thing is really Rabbi Yishmael speaking until we get to Rabbi Shimon. And the other is the whole thing is Rabbi Shimon speaking, and only the line with Rabbi Yishmael is Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, so we're going to have 3 completely different ways of reading this in terms of who's the author of which line. Okay, so that's just the background or the structure. Mantana bishemen lahosif. Rabbi Shimon he. Okay, now the next 4 words I have in parentheses, I'm ignoring them. They clearly came by accident because they appear later. Okay, and it was just kind of copied in the wrong place. So I'm going to read it like this. Abai says, who's the one who says bishemen is lahosif? Who starts that first line? That's Rabbi Shimon, who later you see him saying that, right? Ribakan shemen means, the word shemen means there's extra oil to be had here, right? Ubedina man kamahader, and then when we have the logical argument going, well, how much oil? Then that's Rabbi Yishmael speaking. And that's why he can suggest maybe it's 3, maybe it's just 1, because according to him, there is no riba shemen. He doesn't view shemen as an extra word there. Okay, that means there's more than usual. So bedina manka mahadir, when we get to that logical part of the Braita, well, maybe it's more similar to Nisachim because of Tav Shad, or maybe it's more similar to the Nidava one because of Yagel. That whole part is Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, and then what happens? Let's just go through the whole Braita again. So we start with, right, Rabbi Shimon says, Bishemen is extra. Then comes Rabbi Yishmael and says, no, Bishemen is not necessarily extra. It could be extra, it could be not, we don't know. Let's see. Let's see what it's more similar to. Is it more similar to the Tamid? Is it more similar to the Nidava, to the voluntary? Well, actually, logic doesn't work to say it's more similar because it could be Tavshat, could be Yagil. And what does Rabbi Yishmael then say? We have a pasuk. It says Tamid. That's the reference to teach you. We learn from the Korban Tamid. Then we go back to Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon goes back to what he originally said, which is, I still think B'Shemen is extra. Once it's extra, where are we going to learn it from? Oh, from the sheep, right? From the Tamid. And then we're going to say, wait, why don't we learn it from the bulls and the rams? Because this has an Isaron, and that has an Isaron, and that ends the Braita. So there's a back and forth earlier in the Braita between the two of them as well. Now we're going to go to the second explanation. Rav Huna Bered Rabbi Yoshua Amar, Kula Rabbi Yishmael ben Asher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broki. The whole thing is Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And how does it read? Hachi kamau, Bishemen lahosif lashemen. So Rabbi Yishmael himself starts out with saying, Bishemen is an extra word. It comes to say there's more oil than usual. Because obviously, right, to say oil, you don't need it. This is what we said earlier. Because it says in the pan, we know a panned mincha always comes with oil. Now the other way to say it, and this is the way I read it when I first read it, is that at first they say Bishemen is adding oil, but then they say maybe not. Okay, right? They're always throwing up different possibilities. Maybe Bishemen isn't teaching you extra oil. Maybe you could say it's just to say there is oil in this. And then you can go with the option of maybe it's just one load like the usual. Now, why? Why would it not be obvious it needs oil? Because you could say, you might have thought maybe it's like a mincha chote. Remember, the mincha chote has no oil. In other words, every time they bring out a mincha, they have to tell you, is it with oil? Is it not with oil? So maybe the oil is not extra. In other words, this is more that the Braita starts off saying something and then says maybe not, right? We have that many times. So maybe it's Rabbi Yishmael himself having a debate. Is it with oil? Is it extra oil? Is it not with extra oil? Is the word oil just coming to teach us it needs oil? Then, so that's stage one. What's stage two? Then he goes to the logic. Well, let's see. Is it more similar to the libations, which has extra oil? Or is it more similar to the Nadava, which doesn't? And then he gets nowhere with that because logic could say this and logic could say that, right? Hadar Amar, Tavinami Likboa Lashem. Well, then stage two is, let's assume it is just to say, it's just to put oil in there. In other words, when he gets to that stage of let's see which one it's more similar to, what he's already saying is, maybe let's just suggest that it really is just to say there is oil and not necessarily more. Well, then how do we figure out how much oil? And then he starts with the Titi Medina. Let's come to a logical explanation. Vidan Dina Velo Ateles, so he tries logic, but that doesn't work for him. And then what comes immediately after the logic? Rabbi Yishmael's pasuk. In the end, he holds, right? He learns it all from this drasha of the word tamid. Et chakra. And that's right. That's where Rabbi Yishmael ends his words. Right. That's what we saw him there. We learn it from Tamid. And that whole part is all Rabbi Yishmael. Then we get to Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Yishmael basically holds Shemen is just to say it needs oil, but we have a different pasuk to say it actually needs more oil than usual, but not from the word Bishemen, from the word Tamid. Then we go back to Rabbi Shimon who says, no, I think Bishemen means extra. Where are we going to learn it from? Oh, from the sheep. And then, maybe from the bulls and the rams? No, more likely from the sheep. And that's first Rabbi Yishmael, then Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going to do the reverse. Rabba Amar, third explanation and final one. Kula Rabbi Shimon. Here's the words that were erased before because they're by accident. They got into the wrong place. Now they should be added here. Ve'ilu lo ne'emar kama. The second part, which contradicted the first part, is, well, what if it hadn't said that word? This is a classic word. Well, if it didn't say b'shemen, I still could get you to 3 log. Okay? That's basically what we're going to say. Or maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. That's the question. The hachi kamar. Now we're going to read it from the top. So this is how it reads. B'shemen, so we're starting, it's all Rabbi Shimon. B'shemen lahosif lashemen. B'shemen means it needs more than the usual amount of oil. Te'ilik ba lashemen lo tzarich, because we don't need, again, we're just repeating, we don't need b'shemen, because you would have known from machvat that it's shemen. Kevan tichtiba, al machvat, ki machvat amya. So it's like a mincha machvat, which has oil. Ve'ad shelo yomar b'shemen, yesh li b'din. Now, even if it hadn't said b'shemen, I could prove it by logic. I could say even if you didn't have the word b'shemen, I still would say it would need 3 log. How? Because it's like the mincha nesachim, because of tav shat, right? Those 4 ways it's similar. But then, dan dina v'lo atila, but then the logic didn't work for him to say, well, even without that word, right? So he has to eventually come back to that word, right? So if that doesn't work for him, ve'etzracha b'shemen, and then he has to go back and say, well, then I need to go back to that drasha b'shemen, and that's my drasha. Hadar Amar, then he has to say again, no, but wait, it does need riboy shemen, but maybe we won't learn it from the sheep that it's 3, maybe it's 2 from the rams or the goats or the bulls. By the way, there's a debate among the commentaries whether that question about the bulls and the rams is Rabbi Yishmael countering Rabbi Shimon or it's Rabbi Shimon himself. Okay, it doesn't really matter in the end, but it's interesting. And then Hadar Amar, Danim Mincha Ba'Yisaron, now to Amud Bet and finish the sugya. Then he comes and says, no, it's much more similar to the Yisrael. So the whole thing is Rabbi Shimon, other than what? The one line that says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. So we took a braita that started off anonymous with a diyun back and forth, which actually contradicted itself, right? Seemed to be going in 2 different directions. One saying b'shemen is extra and one saying it's not. And then it had Rabbi Yishmael bringing an answer and Rabbi Shimon bringing an answer, each one learning the same thing but in a different manner. In order to resolve that contradiction, the first part of the braita, we either say that one was Rabbi Shimon, one was Rabbi Yishmael, and they actually started bickering already in the beginning part of the braita, or we say the whole thing was Rabbi Yishmael, and he basically started with one thing, rejected it, and took the other approach, and then only at the end Rabbi Shimon comes in, or the whole thing's Rabbi Shimon, and he basically is saying, well, if you didn't have that, I could still prove my answer, right? I still prove there would be 3 log, but it didn't work, and then he comes back to his original thing and say, well, it does say this, even though maybe if it didn't, I could prove it. Well, I can't actually, but it says this, so b'shemen means extra. And there's just that one line of Rabbi Yishmael in the middle, which says, I don't agree with you, and I learn it in a different way. So that was 3 ways of reading the Braita. That was the complicated part of today's daf. Okay, now we're on to the second part, which is a little simpler and more straightforward, although there are a lot of complicated things in here as well. And I did preface with those psukim that kind of set up, hopefully you remember, the difficulties in the psukim. We'll refer back to them as we go through this. Okay, the Mishnah now starts out. We had the case in the previous Mishnah of a Kohen Gadol who dies in the middle of the day, already brought half of his Yisar, right, his half Yisaron. What does he do with the other, right? We can't use his old one. And the new Kohen has to bring a complete new one from his house and only offer half of it. Now, what if Lomi new Kohen acher tachtav? The Kohen Gadol dies, and they didn't get appointed a new one. This could be in the middle of the day. This could be the next, right? It could be at the end of the day. And now, for the next month or 2, or whatever it might be, we don't have an interim Kohen Gadol. So what happens with this mincha chavitin? So the assumption is, it's very obvious, it's going to be brought every day anyway. The question is, always the question, who's going to pay the money for it? Mishal mihai takreva, from whose money? Because the Kohen Gadol would pay for it himself. But now there is no Kohen Gadol. So classic answer, debate. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Mishal Tzibur. Rabbi Shimon says the community, meaning the Truma V'Lishka, the Machatzira Shekels, right, that we brought, right, this time of year. They would bring the Machatzira Shekel to the temple. They would use the Machatzira Shekel money for the Korban, Mincha Chavitin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishal Yorshim. What do you mean? His heirs. It was supposed to come from this Kohen Gadol. He's no longer alive. His heirs bring it. So now, and the other thing they both agree about, Shlei Mahai Takrefa. Now it sounds like what they're saying is, you would have to bring it completely, meaning, okay, Rashi says, Isaron Shalem Baboker V'Isaron Ben Arbaim. Okay, Rashi says you would bring a whole Isaron both in the morning and in the afternoon. Okay? Kozmachi Kreva Mishal Tzibor. If you're bringing it from the communal, okay, then even possibly Mishal Yorshim as well. They both seem to say it has to be brought as a fully Saron perhaps, like Rashi, both in the morning and at night. Okay, now we get to the Gemara, and we're going to have a Braita, where we're going to have the source for the different opinions. How do you know Mishal Yorshim or Mishal Tzibor? Kohen Gadol shemet v'lo minu kohen acher tachtav minayin shtei menchato kleva Mishal Yorshim. So here's Rabbi Yehuda. How do you know it's the heirs? Talmud Lomar v'kohen hamashiach tachtav mibanav yaseh uta. That weird pasuk at the end, the kohen who is anointed in place from his sons will do it. So how are we going to explain this? Okay, so that means when he dies, banav, the word banav there, right? It could just say HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtav Yaseh Ota. Why does it say mi banav, from his sons? It's to teach you that if he dies and they haven't yet appointed anyone, banav osim et zeh. Okay, his sons have to pay for it. Now we have to get to where do they know that they have to do a complete whole and not half of it. Talmud Lomar Ota. It says Yaseh Ota, it, as if it's one thing, not two parts, right? Two parts of a whole. Kula v'lo chetzia. They have to bring the whole thing at once and not in parts. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Okay, now he's going to disagree about number one. He doesn't think Mibanav is saying the heirs, because he obviously disagrees about that. And he's even going to disagree. He agrees it has to be brought complete, but he's going to learn it from a different source. Okay, different words in the pasuk. Rabbi Shimon Omer Chok Olam, which we thought meant it's a rule forever, right? For the whole, but it's really for the world. What does it mean for the world? Mishel Olam, it's brought from the Olam. What's the Olam? From the community. It's brought from communal funds. That's what that word is coming to teach you. Kalil Toktal, it's burned completely. What do we mean by completely here? We thought it meant the whole thing gets burned. No, it means Shetehi Kula Bahaktara, that the whole thing gets burnt at once. Again, in the case that the Kohen's no longer there. Again, they have to say, even though the simple reading of these Pesukim wasn't talking about a scenario where there's no Kohen Gadol, but they all read that pasuk, that last pasuk, HaKohen HaMashiach Tatam B'nav Yaseh Utah Chok Olam L'Hashem Kalil Toktar. Rabbi Yehuda learns it from the beginning part of the pasuk about Banav, and Rabbi Shimon learns it from the end of the pasuk, the Chok Olam, that it's for the community. Now, comes the Gemara in questions. Hi, Kohen HaMashiach, the first drasha of Rabbi Yehuda that is from Yorshim, he says, wait, but that part of the pasuk is used to darshan something completely different, and therefore it's not available to teach your drasha. Hi, Kohen HaMashiach, l'haki Yuda'ata, that pasuk, Kohen HaMashiach Tatam B'nav, is coming to teach you that the heirs pay when the Kohen Gadol is dead. Hi, Mebai, and no one's yet appointed. Hi, Mebai, le'lechidetanya. That's needed for the following drasha. Ze korban Aharon Banav. Now we're going back to the beginning. Okay, and this is going to address all these problems we had in the beginning. This is the korban of Aharon and his sons, Asher Yakrivu LaHashem, that sacrifice to God. Remember, we said there were a bunch of things. Why his sons are mentioned here, why Asher Yakrivu LaHashem, and B'Yom Mashechoto, on the day he becomes appointed or anointed, but that's not true. This is every day. So Yachol Yehu Aharon Banav Makrivim Korban Echad. Now you might have thought Aaron and his sons together chip in for this, or they bring one korban. This is unclear what even this means. On the day of the inauguration, that they all bring one korban together, but it's weird because they're not all inaugurated on the same day usually. Or maybe it means when the Kohen Gadol takes on his job, maybe his sons have to go together with him in the money. We don't know exactly what this is suggesting. But Talmud Lamal, Asher Yakrivu LaHashem. In the end it says these words are unnecessary. And what does it say? Asher Yakrivu, plural. It sounds like there's multiple korbanot going on here. So what do they answer here? This pasuk is referring to two things, as Becky, you mentioned this yesterday. Aharon b'fnei atzmo, ubanav b'fnei atzman. This is mentioning two things. Becky mentioned yesterday, the Kohanim, on the first day they work in the temple on their inauguration day, they bring the same korban as the Kohen Gadol. Where do we get that from? From here. This says Aharon and his sons for Aaron every day, and for his sons, b'yomi mashechoto, on the day that they become Kohanim. Banav elu kohanim hedyotot. Banav, right? The sons of Aaron don't mean kohanim b'dolim. It means regular kohanim. So now they say, wait a minute. How do you know it's definitely kohanim hedyotot and not kohanim b'dolim? Maybe it means Aaron's sons, after he dies, when they become kohanim b'dolim, they bring the same korban. So now this is what we were looking for. Remember, we weren't darshaning the first pasuk. We want to say this later pasuk about the tachtam mibanav. Rabbi Yehuda had it to teach Mishal Yorshim, but this Braita says, no. What's that coming to teach you? HaKohen HaMashiach Tatam B'Nav teaches you Harei Kohen Gadol Amor. That's talking about the son of Aharon. When he takes over, he'll also have to bring this. Now, don't think this is a one-time korban just for Aharon in the desert, right? No, this is something also, right? The simple reading of that pasuk, HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtam Bibanav Yaseh Uto. The son who takes over for Aaron, and whoever takes over after him, and whoever takes over after him, Chok Olam forever, is going to be bringing the same korban. So Hare Kohen Gadol Amor, Hamani Makayim Banav. Now that's the Kohen Gadol. So why does it say Banav in the first pasuk? Elu Kohanim Hedyotot. Okay, so now we have. Okay, so let's just summarize a bunch of things we learned here. Even though there's one particular, we're going for one particular aspect in this drasha, but the point being that this pasuk, the first one, is referencing Aharon for every day, and that, by the way, we learned because it says Solet Minchat Tamid. He always does this. The sons, meaning regular Kohanim, are B'yomi Mashachoto, on the day they're inaugurated, bring this same korban. And then the later pasuk is talking about, and it's not just Aaron who brings this every day, also his sons after him bring it every day. Now, how can you then say that it means when the Kohen Gadol is dead and no one else is there to bring it yet, because no Kohen Gadol, it comes from the heirs. That's not what it's talking about, right? That's not what we just darshaned. So, in the end, they're going to say, Im ken lichtov kra haKohen HaMashiach tachtav banav yaseh. Right? The one who comes, the sons will do it. My mi banav shmat minat tarti. Now, it's a little hard to read that grammatically, the way they just suggested, but they say the fact that mi banav, you could kind of say is really two words. From the sons, you can learn two things from it. And that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns that it also means if the Kohen Gadol dies, even though it also means when the Kohen Gadol dies and the son takes over, the son has to do this, but right, when Aaron dies, his son, and then after for generations. But it also makes this reference of the mi banav to there is some situation where it comes from his sons, meaning the heirs have to pay for it. Now, that was all Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're going to go to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, hai ota my avidle. Now, what does he do with the word ota? Because remember, he darshans, kalil toktar means complete. Rabbi Yehuda darshaned, ota means complete. So what does he do with the word ota? What we darshaned yesterday, actually from a different pasuk, which in a minute we're going to ask that, but the fact that when he dies and someone else takes over in the middle of the day, you don't bring a half an isaron, that's what he learned from ota. Complete, meaning you have to bring a complete amount to the temple, even though you're doing only half day. Why didn't he learn it from Uma Chatzita that we darshaned it yesterday? Vav lo darsh, because he doesn't darshan Vavim, and that was a drasha on the Vav. And okay, so we resolved that. Okay, what's left? Well, Rabbi Yehuda Chok Olam. What does he do with Chok Olam? Chok Olam, Rabbi Shimon said, that means it comes from Tzibor. He doesn't think that. So what does he do with those words? My avidle. Chukah lo olam tehe. This just means this is a law for generations, the simple way of reading it. Kalil Toktar Lamali. What does he do with Kalil Toktar? Which again, that meant complete according to Rabbi Shimon, but he got complete from Ota. So, Mibayle L'chiditani. He needs this for another drasha, and this is going to lead us onto a drasha about that last pasuk that I mentioned that talks about a regular mincha b'kohen. So now they're going to point out things that appear in the last pasuk about the kohen and things that appear in the pasuk about the Kohen Gadol, and each one's missing something, and then we're going to learn one from the other. And that's what the Kalil Toktar is there for, to make this Gzera Shava, to where it says Kalil Tihiyeh, in the mincha of the kohen, the Kalil is going to be Gzera Shava, to learn from one to the other, and we'll see. Ainli Ela El Yonah B'Kalil Toktar. According to the Psukim, only the top one, meaning the first thing mentioned in the Psukim, which is the mincha of the Kohen Gadol, is completely burned. V'tachtona, now the bottom one, meaning the regular Kohen, remember it says just Kalil Tiyeh. It should be complete, but it doesn't say complete what? It doesn't say completely burned. So, and that one is below te'achel. That one says cannot be eaten, meaning if you eat it, it's a negative prohibition, you'll get lashes, but it doesn't say that in the Kohen Gadol one. So each one has something that doesn't appear in the other, and obviously we're going to do Gzera Shava to learn from each one to the other. Minayin litein et hamor shel zeh b'zeh ve'et hamor shel zeh b'zeh. How do we know that what says there goes for the other one? What says there goes for the other one? Talmud Lamar, Kalil Gzera Shava. Ne'amar kan Kalil, Ne'amar lahalan Kalil. The same word appears in both. Makan b'Kalil Toktal, just like the Kohen of Gadol ones comes completely burned. Af lahalan b'Kalil Toktar, also the Minchat Kohen. Again, a voluntary offering that any Kohen brings. A voluntary mincha offering. And just like by the regular kohen, it's a negative prohibition for eating it. Same thing here. You'll get a negative prohibition if you eat the mincha. It's supposed to be completely burned. Okay. Now we have one last question. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda did with the word klil toktar. So we resolved all the, what does he do with his pasuk? What does he do with his pasuk? We're done. But now we have a separate question of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said, chok olam means it comes from tzibur. Now we're going to have a problem because that means basically it's a Torah law. V'savar Rabbi Shimon mishal tzibur deoraita. This is a Torah law that has to come from the communal funds. V'hatznan, very interesting Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Shimon, same Rabbi Shimon, shiv'ad dvarim hitkinu beitin, v'zeh echad mehem. It says there's 7 things the Beit Din instituted, and this is one of them. So it can't be deoraita if the Beit Din instituted it. So what are they? We're going to go through all 7, but we're going to do 1, 2, and 3. 3 is our topic, so we'll stop there and explain our topic. Then the Mishnah we're going to go back and quote the rest of the Mishnah. That we'll leave for tomorrow. So we're going to start with the first 3. Very interesting halachot. Ovei kochavim sheshalach olato medina hayam. A Gentile sends a sacrifice from abroad to the temple. Shalach iman isachim. Now you're supposed to bring libations with it. If he sent money for the libations, great. Krevim mishalo. We use his money for it. Im lav, krevim mishal tzibur. If not, the community has to pay for those libations. This is fascinating halacha. Why did the Beit Din do this? So there's different explanations, but the one that seemed very logical to me was, well, this is what we call darkei shalom. If a Gentile sends a korban, first of all, some people say it's only if they send it from afar and you can't access them. If you can access them, you can ask them to do it. But what if they don't want to, or what if you can't, right? Now, if we say, well, we can't bring your korban because we don't do it with libations and you didn't give us money for libations, we're going to get in big trouble, right? It doesn't look nice to do that to a Gentile. You also can't, some people say you can't force a Gentile to do things. So what, you're going to force them to pay the money? And then it's going to create tension. So we'd rather avoid the tension and just have the community pay for it, which is fascinating, that the communal funds have to go to pay for this Gentile's libations. Very interesting halacha. Again, it's a takana of the rabbis. V'chein ger shemet. Same thing with a convert who dies. V'niach zvachim. So now what's the problem? He doesn't have heirs to pay for the libations. So he left sacrifices, so we have to bring his sacrifices, but yesh lo nisachim krevim mishelo. If you put aside the money for libations, great. Im lav krevim mishel tzibur. If not, the community pays for it. Utnai Beit Din hu, and third one, this is our topic, Kohen Gadol Shemet v'lo minu Kohen Acher Taftav shetehem minchato kreva mishal tzibur. Now here you have the problem. They instituted that the tzibur pays for it. According to Rabbi Shimon, that was the Torah law. So, Amar Rabbi Avahu, here's the interesting answer. Shtei takanot havu. It went through 2 stages. Doraita midit tzibur. First, by Torah law, it was the community. What happened? Kevan dechazu dekamidak chalishka, but they started to see that maybe also at the end of remember, there was a lot of changeover of Kohanim Gedolim. And in the end, there maybe been a lot of times without a Kohen Gadol. And what happened? The community had to keep paying money. They ran out of money. They were constantly paying for this when Chachavitin was too expensive. So they said, you know what? Takinu l'gabi Yorshim. They said the Yorshim are going to have to pay for it. Kevan dechazu dekapashuba. But then what they see? The heirs weren't paying for it. And in the end, there was no min Chachavitin. So, ukma doraita. So they went back and reinstituted the Torah halacha that it comes from tzibur. And that's how you could explain, according to Rabbi Shimon, it was both doraita and it was a takana of chacham. Okay, interesting daf, although some of it was a bit complicated. But we started with, how do we know that you can prepare this mincha of the chavitin of the Kohen Gadol, bake it, knead it to baking? On Shabbat, we have 4 answers. The 4th answer was that it needs a kli. From there, we quoted this Breita to support it, and the Breita went off on a whole tangent into something completely different. And that was what we had struggling to try to figure out, that one contradiction in there, and how can we read it, about adding oil, and how much oil do you add? In the end, it was obvious the answer was 3 log to the Isaron, but how they got there were 2 different methods of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yishmael, Menachot, Rabbi Yochanan, and Broka, and 3 ways of reading that Breita who was speaking when. Then we got to a case where the Kohen Gadol is no longer there and there's no one. Does it come from tzibur or from the heirs, which is also an interesting debate in and of itself. Where did each one learn it from in the Psukim? And then we ended with, this question, does Rabbi Shimon really think it's doraita? Didn't he himself say it was a takana? And then we had to come up with this creative explanation about how it changed over time. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a Purim Sameach, and we should hear B'sarot Tovot B'karov.